Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this month's session of Changing the Narrative about Black and Latino boys. We'd like to thank you for dedicating this amount of time to us today and for attending this session on an important conversation. I'd like to start by just giving new people a quick explanation of what Future Kings is. Future Kings is a 501 IRS-approved 501c3 nonprofit specializing in teaching college-level STEM topics to Black and Latino boys who are still in secondary school. We teach college-level workforce development skills in the areas of cybersecurity, biomedical sciences, serious games, and drone engineering. And we're able to do that because of a specialized curriculum that we have that translates the college level material into information that is reachable to students in that age group. This and the entire process is designed to help change the narrative about Black and Latino boys by helping them have the life skills necessary to rise to the top of their technical fields once they graduate from high school and then continue on in their adult life. So this series that we have for Changing the Narrative is meant to address some of the topics and obstacles that we know affect young men in this category. Oftentimes, these challenges are challenges which have just become embedded in society, and we overlook them because they become so natural. But those of us who are Black men who have come through the ranks recognize that we had to overcome some of those challenges, and that oftentimes those challenges go unnoticed. And so we're trying to bring these things out so that there can be a coalition of the willing of people who are trying to change the narrative about both Black and Latino young men. Today's topic is deficit thinking. And deficit thinking is a challenge for us because often, although we are coming from areas of challenge, it's not that these challenges have limited or eliminate our potential to be high-performing members of society. But we do know that people can often look at our challenges and set expectations which are well below what we're capable of achieving. And when they do that, oftentimes those lower expectations affects the way that that people will provide benefits to us, or the way that they will speak to us, or the way that they will open or not open doors for us. And so we wanted to have this conversation today about deficit thinking. And as a way of putting us all on the same platform that we're talking about, I'm going to read a quick definition for deficit thinking. Deficit thinking can be broadly defined as a way of thinking about something that blames the victim. In schools, deficit thinking involves the act of blaming a student's family, or a student's culture for academic or behavioral difficulties that occur in school. As an example of that, school staff may assume that because a student is acting out, they are innately bad or they didn't get good training at home, when in fact, that may be a root cause, but it should not set the expectation that we have for those students. So in today's panel, we have three distinguished men. One is Brandon Ferris from the Loudoun County, Virginia Economic Development Activity. A second one is Jelani Ghana from Cheyney University, Office of Student Success. And the third one is General Kip Ward, who is now a retired member of our society, and doing great things on boards and advocacy for a number of different issues. What I'd like to do is have each of them introduce themselves and then tell you something about their perspective on this topic. I'll start with Mr. Brandon Ferris.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you to my fellow panelists as well. As Eric said, my name is Brandon Ferris, and my day job is I work for the Loudoun County Department of Economic Development, where I focus on our economic growth and business relationships in the sectors of manufacturing, logistics, and aviation. By trade, I'm a former Air Force Master Sergeant, served as a veteran for 15 years. But I'm also a small business owner, and I'm on the board of the Loudoun Young Kings movement, similar to Future Kings, but we focus on those boys that are on the precipice of making a life decision that could affect them negatively, and hopefully with the intention of bringing them back. My perspective on deficit thinking is a bit unique to myself and maybe unique to others, but I come from Philadelphia. I come from a neighborhood that is less than ideal for one to grow up in, and a life that is less than ideal for a young person to have. But I persevered, I overcame, I joined the military, I've gone to college and received numerous degrees, and I've seen the effects of those preconceived notions of the expectation that, just because you come from a certain area, a certain city, that you're your hood or you're less than, or that you've seen so many things that you can't overcome, and that you have the odds stacked against you from jump. I'm a product of an environment where that could very much easily be the case, but I didn't let that stop me or become a statistic. So I'm very much open to the conversation around how we can find ways to reshape that thinking in our society and in our educational realm to remove those challenges for people that are victims to that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Well, next will be Mr. Jelani Ghana.
Outstanding. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to discuss a very important topic. Again, my name is Jelani Ghana. I'm the Director of Student Success and Retention at the Cheyney State University of Pennsylvania, America's first HBCU, in the Philadelphia area here. And I've been actively involved for many decades in the development of young Black and brown boys. We have a small city right outside of Philadelphia called Chester, Pennsylvania, considered one of the more challenged, certainly economically under-resourced communities in the Philadelphia region. And we have the challenge that many communities have, whether they're very well resourced or not. How do we help develop our young Black and brown boys? How do we change that narrative? And I've been engaged in a male mentoring program there. My background hovers around athletics and sports, as I do retention and persistence at the university level. I've done college recruiting. I'm a former college basketball player and coach, professional player. And then I spent 13 years in professional sports as an executive in the NBA, where I work with a lot of young Black and Latino professional athletes, who need some of the same type of support and who need a different narrative that we'll talk about today. And then I retired and came back into higher education. So this is a topic that is very important to me. And the expectations, as we talk about in this theory, that the expectations that people have for Black and brown boys and what we can do to change the narrative. So I look forward to some further dialogue, on this issue and sharing some of my experiences and certainly my perspectives. Back to you, Dr. King.
Thank you very much. And then our last introduction will be by General Kip Ward.
Well, thank you, Eric, and I appreciate your inviting me to be a part of this panel this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad that you have decided to spend some time with us as we discuss what I also agree is so critically important. I'm pleased to join colleagues, Brandon and Joel, this afternoon, and I'm just so honored to be a part of a discussion where these two distinguished gentlemen are also present, because it's obvious that they are clearly well positioned to talk about what we're talking about here. And now, obviously, the topic is so critically important. how do we cause our young Black boys, our young brown boys to be successful in an ever-changing, more complex world where they're faced with obstacles, not of their doing, but clearly those that they must overcome and master to be successful. And so this topic for me is one that's critically important as we change the narrative as best we can to do all we can to cause the thinking that is often associated with these young men is changed in a way that they are not additionally disadvantaged because of something that's totally out of their control. As Eric pointed out, I'm Kip Ward. I'm a retired general, born in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm a product of an HBCU, not quite as old as Cheney, Jewel, but a pretty renowned one, Morgan State University in Baltimore. Graduated a year or two ago. When I tell you that I spent 40 years wearing the cloth of my nation, you can begin to put some math to what a few years may mean. And having been now retired from the military after having served over 40 years, or an additional 10 years, you get some idea of my vintage, if you will. But having said that, my military career enabled me to travel all over the world as an Army officer, commanding formations at every level from platoon through combatant command, but to include in a joint and combined environment, as well as a multinational environment. That means serving with members from all the services and branches of our Department of Defense, to include our federal government civilian agencies, as well as many non-governmental organizations that support peace and stability globally. As we approach this topic, there's something that I'd mentioned here, and that is when it comes to how those who are part of a population, and now we're focused here in America on our young Latin and Black boys, but when it comes to this notion around the world, there's a common dynamic, and that is how somebody else looks at you, and because of what you look like, where you came from, and what your background is, make judgments that then precludes you, but importantly causes them to react to you in a way that's different than what they could otherwise have done and have been a part of your road to success. And so I'm pleased to join this conversation this afternoon because hopefully we can provide those of you who are watching some tools that you can use, because it's certainly not a journey that we won't solve the four of us. We need the support of our entire community. Those of you who are listening, we can do our best to dispel some of these things and help create an environment that will be more appropriate for the success that we all want for these young men. Because truly, when it comes to what our communities, our state, our nation, where we live, and in fact, the global commons, when it comes to what it will be in no small measure due to the performance, the work, the achievement of all of our young folks, and critically, our young Black boys, our Latino boys, who are such an important part of this dynamic. And we want to do something that I've used and loved my entire lifetime just about, cause these young men and boys to be all that they can be. And this program hopefully will provide you with some tools, some thoughts, some ideas, some things that you may be able to take into your places of work, where you live, to help us all do what we can to help these young men achieve their successes as well. So pleased to be with you this afternoon. Thanks very much. Now stop there for now.
What I'd like to do is to take these intros and drill down a little bit further by having each of us give like a personal story about how we believe we have been victimized by this type of deficit thinking. For example, in my case, I came up in the 60s, and in those days we had something in school called tracks, and eventually that was eliminated. But in the tracks, your school district would decide what your future is going to be, and then they would put you into educational tracks that were designed to accomplish that for you. If they thought you're going to be an exceptional student and go to Harvard, they might, in my school district, they'd put you in track 1. If they thought that you were going to be pretty smart, maybe not college elite, but college bound, they put you in track too. If they thought all you could do was, if they thought you were going to be the type of person who could work in an office, maybe with not much leadership, they would put you in track 3. And if they thought that you were going to be someone that was destined to be completely manual labor, then they would put you in track 4. And if they thought you're going to be a criminal, they put you in track 5. And depending on what track you were in, that's how you were treated. That's the types of instructors that you got. And there was no one who was Black in my school district who was in anything other than tracks 3, 4, or 5. So no one in our school district, no Black person in my community was in track 1. None were in track 2. And we were all expected to be, at best, someone that could work in a professional environment, and at worst, we're going to be criminals. And so we were treated that way. Now, in my case, I had a mother who was, she was a praying mother, but she was also a fighting mother. And so she knew that I had college level ability, and she would not let them up until she moved me from track 3 to track 2. But I did face expectations issues all through high school. And I don't know when I ever got away from those expectations. I would say that I'm still fighting some of those expectations, that when people see me, they expect one thing or the other. But I know for a fact that when I was in high school, that all my teachers looked at me with a certain lens that did not look at what the talent they thought I might have. They didn't even gauge the talent that I might have. They looked at me strictly as a Black boy with limited abilities, and then they taught me that way. So I'd like to open that up. Which of you would like to go first? Maybe give me an experience of yours.
Hey, I'll start, Dr. King, again, Jelani Ghana. A big part of my focus on this topic of, developing and changing the narrative of Black and Latino boys will be not only sharing my experiences, but also just kind of getting you to think about what you think of yourself. What are the expectations that you have for yourself? Because at the end of the day, the changing of the narrative has to start and will end with who you think you are, what you think your capabilities are for yourself, your aspirations. And when I think about, a very poignant incident that happened in my life, I'm the next generation. I'm the late 60s, 70s kid. And thinking about my own expectations for myself, and I remember being integrated into a school, weren't that many students of color, Black and brown, boys and girls there. We were all young and innocent. And through elementary school, always got very good grades. And then had to move back to the neighborhood school for what they called middle school at that time. We called it junior high. And I met for the very first time my first Black teacher. Joe Sessoms is his name. And I remember after the first marking period, I got my first C, a 79, math. And Mr. Sessoms was touted as being the man, the brother, the Black teacher, the cool guy, would grip you up, all that kind of stuff. And here this man, supposed to be a brother, gave me a C. So I was not very happy with Mr. Sessoms. And I remember going home on the school bus. We rode on the cheese bus. And I'm sitting there with my report card in my hand. And like yourself, Dr. King, I don't come from parents that are going to beat me down if I don't do well, but they had expectations for their kids. And it was a very short bus ride, but Lord knows it seemed like it was a long ride. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm the outgoing star athlete, football player, and I'm just sitting there like paralyzed. And I could not hold back And next thing you know, man, the tears just started coming down. And so everybody's looking around like, man, what's going on with Jelani? What's going on? And I'll never forget it, man. Somebody snatches the paper out my hand and they said, oh, he's crying because he got a C. And the whole bus they jumped over the seat. They were clowning me. Oh, they were killing me. It was just a very difficult time. So I get home, go upstairs to my room. I'm not going to get in punishment. I'm not going to get whipped or anything like that. It was just a C. And the next morning I woke up and I said, you know what? What's wrong with a C? C is not bad, it's average. See, the expectation was, oh yeah, it's not bad. I'm gonna end my story like this. The next morning I get up and I'm in Mr. Sesam's class. That bell's gonna ring. Man, I'm trying to get out of that classroom. And all I could hear him say was, sit down, Joel. This mother. So you know I was cussing him out under my breath. He's supposed to be a brother. He's supposed to be cool. He clowning me in front of all these white folks. Oh, nah, he ain't gonna do this to me. So everybody left the room. And so he says, I heard what happened on the bus, because that was the talk in the hallways. Joel was crying because he got a C. He's supposed to be Mr. Football and basketball star. So he says to me, Mr. Sessom says to me, I'm not going to give you that 1 point. Remember, I got a 79, so an 80 is a B. He says, I'm not going to give you that 1 point, but you can earn it. And with my head down, I looked up right in his eye, and he changed that narrative. He said, I know both your sisters, I know your parents. You are different. You can be the one. And he went on to share with me, because he changed the narrative about who I could be, because my narrative for me was, hey, I'm average. You know, and he knew I had more to get. The moral of the story, the reflection, is not that I ended up becoming like this super duper honor roll student, even though I did make honor roll. He knew that I had to change the narrative about who I saw in the mirror, that I could do more. To this day, me and Mr. Sessoms are like this. He's retired, one of my mentors to the day. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so committed to changing the narrative here in the Philadelphia region, because I know what his talk to me did. It totally transformed how I thought about myself and what I was capable of doing. So I wanted to share that testimony with you guys today on the webinar as we talk about changing the narrative.
Great, because this thing about deficit thinking applies to how we look at ourselves as well as how other people look at us. So that's a great point to make. Brandon, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Along the lines of Jelani, I grew up, again, Philadelphia. I grew up down the bottom, if anybody's familiar with that. So this is the neighborhood beneath the neighborhood, so to speak. But my mother and stepfather worked very hard and moved us up to Roxborough, which is kind of a middle class neighborhood. But my parents were doing okay, so they decided for 5th grade that they would send me to a private Catholic school for like, hey, we got a little bit of dollars, we want to make sure that you get the best education because you're smart, you're bright, all of those things, cool. But when I got to the school, most of the nuns and teachers there were very accepting, but there was this one teacher that kind of gave you the look, and if my brother's on the call and anyone in the audience knows, the look is like, how'd you get in here? And so, I did well in my classes, but always gave me the look. And so went so far as to one day, he was like, oh, hey, through conversations, how you doing? Hey, I'm all right. Okay, cool. So, are you in the scholarship program? No. Oh, okay. So maybe, you don't have, both your parents at home. No, I have a mother and a stepfather. My biological father is not around, but I have 2 parents that both work. Oh, well, maybe you're an athlete. No, not athletically inclined either. Well, I'm just wondering how'd you end up here? my mom sends a check every month. I don't understand. And being in fifth grade, you don't necessarily know, what it is that you're answering to, but reflecting back on that through these conversations and growing up, that teacher had an assumption placed upon why I ended up there. The one of two African American kids in this entire Polish Catholic neighborhood that's going to this private school. You must be there through the charity of someone else, or because you have some kind of athletic prowess that sets you apart. It can't possibly be because your parents can afford to send you here, or that you're a scholar or a good student. It must be through the charity of others that you have been given this opportunity. And so for me, that always that shifted the way I thought about things as I got older. I never wanted to even give the perception of relying on the charity of others. I wanted to do things myself, which probably led to making some things a little bit more challenging for me than they needed to be, because I'm not one to particularly ask for help. But that thought that someone is in a place truly because of charity or because they're less than, not because of the potential that's seen within them, or the sincere will and determination of the people around them to work hard to send you places. Those kinds of thoughts still permeate the educational system, private and public, to this day. And it is shaping the way, along with all of the other things that people of color have to endure. You also have to endure the preconceptions, the misconceptions, the preconceived notions of those that are in a position to educate and change your life, much like Jelani had. So it's very interesting how perspective and someone else's perception of you can shape who you will be in the future.
Kip?
Thanks. I just so much enjoyed listening to both Brandon and Joel, and you too, Eric, talk about those experiences, because the parallels are just, they're just everywhere that they're there. For me, I was from Baltimore. I started school before I guess it was right at the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And so when I started elementary school in Baltimore, schools were still segregated. And I remember my first school was a little two-room school, and this is in Baltimore City, a little two-room school, two teachers. The 4th through 6th grade teacher was also the principal. And I was in the 1st grade. There's no kindergarten in those days, so let alone preschool. I got preschool from my grandmother, who was kind of like our daycare mom. My mom and my dad both work full time, and so sometimes and whatnot, they're working. I'm with my grandmother, and that situation for me remained the same until my parents built a home outside of the city, and I went to an integrated school. And in the 6th grade, and I was a decent student. I wasn't the best in the class, but I was getting good grades. I didn't have any traumatic experiences, Jules, like you, my friend. Your C's were part of the regiment, so when I got my first one, it wasn't a big deal. But I'm in a class there in the 6th grade, and in fact, the only Black teachers I had was the one that I had there in that school, that little integrated school, correction, a little segregated school, until I got to Morgan. From once we moved and I started another school, all my teachers were white. So this white male teacher said something to me, and it was in a class, and I believe it must have been grammar, because the thing that resonates was the fact that I used the term, and I think we were talking about the subjects and verbs and adjectives, and I called something a helping verb. And if you all remember, that may have been an adjective, and I may have used the term helping verb. And he just stopped. I'm the only Black person in my class, only little black boy in this class. And then he said, well, you need some help. And that embarrassed the absolute bejuju out of me. That just embarrassed me. You needed help. Just blurted out in the class. All the other white students, chuckled and giggled and whatnot. One on and one on. I just, kind of internalized all that. I just kind of sat there and the class went on. I'm go all the way through high school or junior high school. Jewel, I'm like you would. Elementary was 1 to 6, junior was 7 to 9, and high school was 10 to 12. And high school, and I wasn't the star athlete, but I played sports and football, ran track, baseball. And when it came time to graduate from high school, my mom and my dad, thank God for them, both are gone on the glory, but that clearly inspired me with talking about college. And this is at home. But I go to school there in high school, and my classmates all talking about college, but they being called into the counselor's office to talk about college. I never got called into the counselor's office to talk about college. No one in that high school administration ever said a word to me about going to college. To say nothing of potential scholarship opportunities, schools you might want to consider applying to, none of that. It all came from my mother and my father. So the institution, if you will, is zero to say, young man, you are college material. Have you considered going to college? These are some colleges that you can go to. You need to apply now. These are the early admission requirements. These are the grade point requirements should you decide that you want to go to college. Those things that all my classmates were having conversations about around me because of what they had received from the high school counselor, none of that came to me, not a single piece of it. So, but for my mother and my father, who would say, hey, this is what you're going to do, that would not have been a part of anything that would have come to me because of what the institution was not doing. Now, why I was being looked at a certain way, I can only imagine is because of who I was. It wasn't like I was cutting up. I mean, I wasn't the best student, but I wasn't at the bottom of the realm. I was right there in the middle of the road. So I guess, Eric, I may have been your track 2 guy, or maybe maybe your track 3 guy, but somewhere in that range, if you will. But that was a part of a process that very deliberately excluded me from being all that I could be because of what I look like. And at the time, obviously, I wasn't thinking about it in those terms. I mean, it just, my thought processes hadn't gone to it. My parents weren't bringing it up because although they were both high school graduates, neither one of them had gone to college. And so again, these were things that they had not been exposed to either, from the standpoint of now taking their experiences and relaying them to me. And because the institution wasn't doing it, I wasn't receiving it. And that has guided a lot of what I do these days with respect to my talks to young men about their potential, exposing them to things that might be out there for them to take advantage of. So that notion of exposure, in addition to what other people may be saying and thinking about you, this whole notion of deficit thinking and why they either talk about you in a certain way or refuse to allow you to do things in a certain way. And I'll be very candid, and that just didn't stop there at high school. My experience at Morgan was a great experience because it was clearly there when some of the experiences, Jewel, that you talked about were came my way as well. And those were experiences of deficit thinking from the standpoint of how the institution denied me. It was how the institution encouraged me. Sometimes it was tough encouragement, but it caused me to think about things in a different way, as opposed to not being able to think about them at all because they weren't even being brought to my attention. And that's what that experience at Morgan did for me. But Dr. King, I heard you also mention that even today, I went through a military career, following my military career, a corporate career. And even then, through those stages, but for the fact that and it goes to the point that Jewel made, that I'm thinking about things in a certain way, I was able to overcome. But it clearly wasn't because the institution was looking at me in a certain way to ensure I was able to overcome and move forward. And so for those reasons, I am so dedicated to at least doing my best to cause young Black boys, Latino boys to think about themselves in a different way that they can do, but also to do what we can to cause things that impact them, be they institutions or people, to look at them in a way such that they are also receiving that type of support from their community, their surroundings, their environment, because it takes all of that to indeed produce success. Because we certainly need, we don't do things by ourselves. We certainly have to have internal fortitude and all those things, but it's how we are supported by others to really cause us to propel to the heights that we can certainly look forward to achieving. So I'll talk a bit more later, but I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
And that is powerful. And one of the commonalities for all of us is that we've come to environments where there were limited expectations of us. And one way or the other, we had to overcome those limited expectations in order to get any type of level of success. Thinking about my time as a math teacher in a middle school, being exposed to students who are coming out of elementary school into middle school, I was often confronted with young Black boys or Latino boys who had already determined in their own minds that they could not be successful in a career, that nothing in their future had success in it, and that the most they could hope for was to get a menial job when they graduated from high school. A lot of times that was because they had been beaten down by their environments, even in elementary school. And they were beaten down because people thought that they had nothing. I was in a Title I school, and all the students there, all the Black and Latino students there were economically challenged, and some were, the Latinos, many of them were first generation in the United States. Most of the Blacks were living at poverty or below poverty, and they typically did not do well on the school standardized test. And so teachers looked at them with the idea that it was their poverty that was going to keep them from being academically successful. And so the teachers didn't put as much energy into them as they could have. They didn't look at how the student's potential was. They looked at what his economic background was and what his skin color was, and made determinations about what his future was going to be. And by the time that student got to be in sixth grade, he had almost given up, and none of them had parents. So the question that I wanted to, none of them had parents that knew the ropes and could encourage them and could explain to them that they could have successful, because those parents were also going by what the teachers were telling them about their child. And even though the parent may have thought that their son had more going for him than that, when the teacher said that he had not much of a future, the parents often buy that. So the point of all that is maybe you guys could all talk about whose responsibility it is for overcoming some of this deficit thinking. You've all kind of made mention of the fact that you had a household that supported you, but was there also a village around you that was supporting your, that could look at you for your potential and not just for your life circumstance? And do you think there's also the responsibility of those in the greater society to look at you and not look at just your economic circumstance or your skin color, but just look at you as a young person and automatically think they're going to do the best they can to help you be the best you can be? Which of those two is it? Brandon, maybe we can start with you this time.
Absolutely. It's very easy to say that, it starts at home. Like, your parents are, your first champion, your cheerleaders, and they should instill in you the self-confidence that you need to move through life. In reality, the circumstances that it seemed like the four of us grew up in, our parents were working. They may not have had the dedicated time to focus on us in the ways that you see in sitcoms or things like that, where mom and dad are home all the time and they're available for advice. So to that aspect of it, I would say that it is a village approach, but it does start with our first friends, our first experience and exposure to adults that are not family, that are required to show us things, are our teachers and educators. So there is a bit of civic responsibility that falls upon educators to encourage and grow young minds, right? So the profession of teaching, it comes with those responsibilities that you should encourage the strength of the child. Right? You can focus on the growth mindset, so to speak. When we were doing research for the discussion, the growth mindset is the direct counter of deficit thinking, not using the deficiencies as a crutch, using the deficiencies as an opportunity to think a different way to encourage growth in that person. So if the student or person, it doesn't have to be a student, or the person comes to you and says, or they don't have to say it, but you can say, okay, you know what, you're going to take, you're not going to do so well because you come from a less than supportive family background. The counterpoint to that is, okay, I know you may not have access to these resources at home, but I can give you the structure that you need. I can give you the support that you may need and encourage you in a way that, will still keep you going. It's about flipping the problem on its axis, not looking at it as an anchor, but looking at it as a propelling point, as a propeller, so to speak, how it can move you forward.
Okay. Kip, you want to go next?
That's a great point. Clearly, the responsibility to ensure the success of our youth is a shared responsibility. And that begins at home, to be sure. Some homes do it better than others. Some homes don't do it at all. We all know that. So therefore, this notion of who else shares in that responsibility? Institutions in our democratic society that are based on the Constitution that we live under, that says that every individual has human worth and dignity. Their worth then, in my mind's eye, becomes a part of the communal responsibility to nurture, to encourage, etc. So therefore, institutions have that responsibility, to be sure. Education in this country, free education, free, quote unquote, I'm a property taxpayer, so I mean, it's being paid somewhere, but insofar as the opportunity to have an education is there. So how do you do that? So institutions clearly have a responsibility. Communities, be they religious organizations, be it extended family, be it business proprietors, et cetera. I mean, we all have a responsibility to, I believe, share in the growth and nurturing, if you will, of our young people. Where that is not done, especially in the case of young Black boys, Latino boys, and sometimes others as well, because of a circumstance that they have nothing to do with, be it the color of their skin, the neighborhood where they live, what goes on in their community and around them is what they do not control. And to ascribe those circumstances to how you view a young person, I believe is where we all need to step back and reassess ourselves. Because I think being reminded that when you look at a person, it is your responsibility as a shareholder in their nurturing growth and development to do what you can to help guarantee their success. If we all did that, we'd be in a whole lot different position than we are today. So for me, there's one thing that I try to do and try to remind folks of. Dr. King, if you permit me, I'll take a bit more time here before I turn over to Jewel. Something that I think I've been a part of my whole life, but it resonated to me most poignantly when I was the United States Security Coordinator to Israel and the Palestinian Authority working in Israel. And I was in charge of a program that was trying to build confidence between the Israelis and the Palestinians, traveling all over Israel, from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank to Nazareth to the Capernaum, all over and I would sit down and have meetings with the Israelis and with the Palestinians. And before we could even get started in the meeting, one of them would start telling me about the other, what they hadn't done, what was wrong with them. And after a couple of iterations that, I would go into a meeting and be the obligatory refreshers offered, typically some water or some tea. And I would take my bottle of water in my glass. And Jewel, what I do, my friend, I pour that bottle of water into the glass half full. And I would say, okay, now before we start talking about anything, we're looking at a glass here, and it's half of it is empty, half of it's full. We're going to begin with what's in the glass, as opposed to what's not in the glass, because we're going to find a common way to move forward here. And so I would say to this community, if you will, this shared group who are responsible for nurturing youngsters, we move forward with a way that causes us to, when you look at a person, don't tell me what's wrong with her or him. There's always something about someone that you can find that you can be supportive of, that you can celebrate. So celebrate that piece of it and begin your reinforcement from that point of celebrating as beginning your journey with them of degrading or denying or casting off because of what's not there or some characteristic they have nothing to do with, be it a broken home, economic background, no parents, past criminal activity, whatever the case may be. And so my message would be, yes, we all share in that. We share in nurturing these young boys, sometimes not so young boys, but that nurturing ought to begin from a position of what is it about that individual that I can celebrate, because we can all find something to celebrate. And if you can't, just start looking for that. You can delve into that individual. Let's find something that I can celebrate you for. And we move forward from that. But we all share in that effort to make that the case. Thanks.
Outstanding. We're going to come back to that in a couple minutes too. Jelani?
Yeah, I'll echo the sentiments of my esteemed colleagues here that it's definitely a shared responsibility. What I would say to those that are going to be watching, this video later, or those that are on with us today, the theme of what I want to say is don't give up. Is don't give up. I think as General Kip said, just kind of reorganize yourself to go out and actively seek the good, the half full, because it's very easy today to be lured into the negativity. And it's understandable, because very often that narrative that we're talking about, the projection of these young boys in particular, Black and Latino boys, is oftentimes very negative. And it comes at us in such consistent waves that even people who see themselves as good people, open-minded people, don't even oftentimes realize that they're doing things and saying things or have an energy around them that oftentimes negatively impacts, in particular, this group of young people. And so the first thing I would say, because it is a shared responsibility, and what can we do, is to just kind of reorganize ourselves, and to say, let me just kind of, get back to being optimistic, because we understand, with all the media stuff out there, that it's very easy for negativity to seep into your classrooms or to the teams that you're coaching, your mentoring programs, and those kinds of things. The second part is that, a lot of what we're talking about here, it goes against oftentimes some of the foundational structures that exist in America today. We talk about the village. We talk about a shared responsibility. We talk about, I am because we are, and we are because I am. But yet, in the areas and in the world of frustration, sometimes it's like, it's on you. You got to do your own thing. It's you. And what I would ask, teachers and practitioners and those of us is to just kind of regroup and say, at the end of the day, yes, we want students, young people and not so young people to make the good decisions, but we do play a monumental role in shaping that. And we cannot shrink despite the frustration, because we all know, we watch the news, we read the stuff, and it's so easy to say and point fingers. And even myself, I've got to regroup and say, all right, yes, he or shouldn't have done that. Yes. And there's going to be some accountability and personal responsibility that comes with that. Yes, I'm not shirking that reality, but we cannot. I think the theme and why you brought us together is to remind us that we cannot give up on anybody, but especially this group that we've seen persist in terms of being marginalized, oftentimes, discounted or counted out, and that we need everybody to help us. The final point is the investment. That Black and Latino boys, like anybody on the planet, they are worth the investment. There are lost cause. I just want to, no, we need you to, the investment is worth it in these young people that oftentimes you want to dismiss, or oftentimes they feel like you want to dismiss, is that one. They are the ones you've been waiting for. They are the ones you've been looking for, hoping for, praying for, to solve the next generation's challenges. They are right there. We don't want you to say, oh, it can't be them because of their GPA, because of their skin color, because of their community, their home. Who you're looking for is right there. And so, I love, what my colleagues and all of us said, that this is a shared part of our duty to one another as human beings. And I just wanted to make that point to just remind all of us that, say we are in these professions, teaching and coaching and mentoring, we need you to find it, to find the courage within yourself to begin to self-examine and then get back out there and develop these young men.
I think that's excellent. And we're starting to run short on time now, but I would like everyone just to maybe give me a quick explanation, building on Kip's point about looking at our glass being half full. How are we going to get others to look at our boys with that optimistic view that there's something there worth building on? And instead of looking what they don't have, look at what they do have. How can we message this to the broader community so that they will have the same sense of urgency about this that we do? Kip, it was your point, so why don't you give it to us in the beginning, then we'll run around, then we'll go through the circle.
Well, I appreciate that. In this day and age, I'm probably the least equipped to say how we need to go about doing it now, other than word of mouth and who you encounter. For me, I'm not a social media guru. I know what it is, but for me, encouraging the narrative, the stories that are told. I love the point made by Jewel there. You look at the news, you things that you hear, it's the negative piece. Every time I encounter that, I just go crazy, because for every negative story that's out there, there are a dozen that are positive that don't get told. Celebrating what our young folks do through organizations, our Black fraternities and sororities need to do a better job in celebrating our youngsters. There are programs where they get rewarded for various things. And where do you hear about it? Well, you hear about it in the circles that you talk to, as opposed to having it being publicized out there in the greater society, if you will. Our universities, our schools, our high schools. You have programs, and all you hear about on the news are these things that are going on when you have I guess the disagreements about what to be taught, but the fact that you have some Black student that's doing something in that school that community service, I look at college scholarship applications, if you will, and part of that process typically includes, what they've done for community service. Some of those things they so absolutely outstanding, but unless I read about it in that scholarship application, I had no idea. And so how are our schools publicizing these things from the standpoint of having in your local city councils and town councils, having every meeting open up with a positive narrative about what these young men are doing. Every way that we can, going into our churches, when the preacher gets up there or the imam or the rabbi, whoever it is, starts the message, start your message off with a positive story about one of these young people. You have, we kind of see it on the State of the Union, and the president does it, and up in the balcony there, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, they all have someone up there, a little good news story. Start everything that you do off with a good news story about these young people. It doesn't matter where you are. You go and you even in your places of business, start it off with entrepreneurs up and down the streets. So that you're promoting what goes on is the way we do it. And obviously the social media piece of it. I wish every Black athlete that's out there making up, if they, as opposed to take some time to publicize something about this. We have a few of them that do it. Obviously, Shaquille O'Neal, famous for it. The NBA, not the NBA, I guess it's the, and I'll stop because I'm going on and on. These things come to me. I guess it's in the Football Hall of Fame, the Walter Payton Award that's given.
Yeah.
You hear about that, it's a one and done. Somebody goes up and knocks somebody over their head, it's repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. So if everyone goes in to do things like that, to just publicize, that's where we begin to change the mindset. And when the subject matter or the subject are these young men who have been otherwise denigrated, they're now celebrated. I'll stop. I apologize, gents.
No problem. But that is a great point about what we can do as part of trying to be part of the solution. Jelani, how about you next?
Yeah, we have an awesome challenge, and I think we're up for it. We have an awesome challenge, and we're going to have to go deeper, because if we're going to be honest, many of the institutions that we currently have are not always equipped. And some would even argue or design to perpetuate some of the narratives that we, find distasteful. And this is not, unfortunately, something that is new, because we've got centuries, unfortunately, of a history. So to your point, like what can we do? And part of that, it will be, institution building and program, like you're doing with the Young Kings, to supplement and to try, on one hand, to move more of that kind of development into the mainstream student engagement experience at the educational level. So it's no longer just an after-school program, like there's the major subjects and then there's the elective. So, you can kind of choose. No, our young people really need that as a major part of their experience. It can't just be an after school or a Saturday or Sunday morning activity, because they need to absorb it on a very consistent basis, because they are absorbing the other narratives on a very consistent, deliberate, and breathtaking basis. And it's going to have influence. They'll may meet a General Kip or a Brandon and Jelani or Eric, and they're like, okay, that's interesting. But the 10 other people that I've met, the 30 other people I've met, they could care less about this stuff. They're just trying to get the Benjamins and get paid. So, how do we change and alter that dynamic? And I think institutions, even at Cheney University, the nation's first HBCU, we're struggling with that narrative for our students in general, but especially our boys, our young men who are at the college level, but the way that they perceive themselves is, something to behold. So we have to look at, in terms of what we can do, really looking at our institutions. And I'll make one last parallel. When communities, however they are defined, but when communities begin to see that the best of their culture is under attack or are in jeopardy of not producing and replicating the best parts of their community, what those communities do is they begin to recreate institutions. And I don't want to depart from our prior conversation about this shared responsibility, because it is an American, national, and global issue. But there is something to be said about various communities. I'll just use, for example, the Catholic community. And they wanted to perpetuate whatever Catholicism and its cultural foundations. And they invested and they created an archdiocese. So whether you're a Muslim, whether you're calling yourself a Jew, whether you are a Jewish person, whether you're in traditional African faith, when lunchtime comes and you're at that school, you pay your money to go to that school, everybody gets up, they do the Holy Father, and because they recognize that in the public setting, their culture or the perpetuation of their culture is going to get diluted, it's going to get lost. And so when we start thinking about the development, wholesale development of our young boys, and you were talking about professional athletes and entertainers, those with major disposable income, the time is coming where we're going to have to really think about creating institutions that really put these types of development activities as front and center. And some of that is maybe a little bit of scary because it may seem like it's a departure from some of the rhetorical things about Dr. King and integration and all of those kinds of things. But we have to be realistic and maybe look at it a little bit differently, changing that narrative that we're not giving up on America and we're not giving up on the rhetoric about everybody being equal, but the development of these boys and their spiritual, social, mental, cultural, and social well-being is so critical that maybe we can't leave it up to the public school to do it, that maybe we have to follow the lead of other institutions and make sure that they get that foundation so that when they do go out, they can properly navigate America. So those are things that I think, obviously, it's a different conversation, a different discussion, but those are things that we're really going to have to consider. I know, Brandon, y'all pay tuition. Y'all pay tuition to go to school when you move, in St. Joe's Prep or St. James or St. this, it's low. You come in here, this is kind of what we're going to be giving you. You go to a public school, it's like an open window. It ain't all clean air that comes through an open window. Sometimes some funky air comes through that window. So I don't want to depart from all of the work that our ancestors have done with, Brown versus Board and all of these kinds of things. But for those that went to an HBCU like General Kit, that before you went out and did your graduate and military stuff, that foundation at Morgan State prepared you to properly navigate America and take advantage of all of her things. We have relied on overt Jim Crow and overt, things to make us different world now. So we might have to kind of refocus and think about doing something different.
Excellent. Okay, Brandon, you're going to tie us up?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the foundation laid by my brothers at General Ward and with Jewel. So I would say that the one component, and it's awesome how we play off of each other. The one component of this that my brothers didn't mention was the self reflection through service, right? So if there was something that you didn't receive when you were coming up, or something that you saw that you wanted to do differently, it's intrinsic upon us to give that back out into the community through service. And one thing I can say about my military service, and Kip can say about his, and Jewel can say about his work with the youth and things like that, that I've learned more about myself through service to others that lacked things that I wasn't strong in necessarily, or things that I was strong in and helped them learn, than any other activity. And it's something that I'm experiencing now through my work with Young Kings, through my connection to Eric and Future Kings, that reflective service, taking those qualities that have been instilled upon you through your experiences, through your life, through your job or whatever, and giving those back out into the community through, it can be through a program like Young Kings or Future Kings. It can be through your church. It could be through, you know, speaking at schools or whatever as a representative for your different business entities. But the reflective nature of service is that the more you clean the mirror, the more clear the picture becomes, the more accurately you can see yourself. So if we strive to create a better picture, a society that is more reflective of the people that we wish to be and are becoming, then by nature, we will change the perspective of deficient thinking to that of a growth mindset that will bring our youth up from where they are or wherever they could have been to a place higher than we could ever go. And I'll just leave that there.
Well, I thank you all so much for your words on this panel. Those in the audience who were able to attend, we thank you for your time. We've been able to cover not only the definition for what we mean by deficit thinking, but we've been able to discuss some of the approaches that we might take in order to overcome that. Maybe some of the messaging that we can have, things that each of us can do as part of solving the problem. If nothing else, it'd be great if everyone can at least recognize that this is a problem, whether it be subtle or overt, it's there. And hopefully we've increased the sensitivity to it so that all of us will begin to start taking some of the corrective actions. And maybe even some of us will begin designing programs to overcome this. One of the key messages that I heard today is that there are a lot of organizations focusing on building up Black Latino boys who are working in the shadows. They're doing great work, but no one except their organization knows about it. But when someone does the wrong thing, they make the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, the weekly news, and it's all over. And so the good work that's being done is not being advertised nearly as much as the failures. And so if nothing else, we can change our perspective, identify the applications of the deficit thinking, and then look at some of the solutions that we've talked about today as part of overcoming this recognized deficit. Last thing is I'd like to thank everyone again for being here. Future Kings will have our next topic or next webinar in May, and we hope that you will join us again for that. Again, I'd like to say thank you to General Kip Ward, to Mr. Jelani Ghana, and Mr. Brandon Ferris for a very instructional panel. And I thank you all for serving with me today on this. And with that, I will say good evening.